everybody. Hello, John.
This looks interesting.
Thank you. It is. I have no idea what it means, but we'll find out.
Well, that's
Good
the whole
evening.
point of the talk, right?
That is part of the talk. We're going to find out.
And notice I moved over to the center section.
Oh, you're
I
good.
don't
Keep
want
moving. It's hard to hit a moving target. So anyway, great to see all of you. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to talk to you about Buddhism and about the mind of the Buddha. Now, you know, I never let a talk title get in the way of a good talk, you know. So I thought that might draw a few people. But it's really basic. You've heard of the book, right, by Sheldon Kopp, named, that's the exact title, but it is applied to the idea of in psychoanalysts in the recovery process, where patients have the tendency to give away their power, to transfer their power to someone else, in many cases to the therapist. And if that happens, there's a great danger because you give away yourself. You're really there to work on yourself. And so this is kind of a metaphor, and it's loosely based on a 9th century Buddhist monk who was one of the founders of the Rinzai tradition of Buddhism in Japan, of Zen Buddhism in Japan. And basically what it means is this. As we go through life, we have a tendency to kind of set up people and suggest, oh, there's the ideal person. There's someone, you know, who I can trust, someone who is the Buddha, who is the enlightened one. And if you are searching for enlightenment and you think that you found it, you haven't found it. It isn't there. And so that it's a reference to not to physically murder the Buddha, but to kill that image in your mind of giving away your power to someone else, someone who sets themselves up as a guru. I remember during the late 60s and 70s, there were so many gurus, self-proclaimed gurus, and people gave away their power and they handed it off to other folks. So it's a loose reference to that. But what we're really talking about tonight is the idea of what was in the mind of the Buddha and what happened with something known as Mahayana Buddhism and how that changed into the kind of Buddhism that we refer to and that we know today. So I want to take you back some 2,600 years, and here's where we're going. We're going to talk about the foundation of Buddha, of who he was and what he originally taught. But he wanted to keep it among his monks, but it just so happened that teaching was confined to a very restricted class of people, these monks, for 500 years. And then everything changed. And so when things changed, we get into something known as Mahayana Buddhism. So we'll talk about that as well, how Buddhism changed and why it changed and what factors contributed to all of that. So the Buddha, this wonderful person, is, I got to turn this on. Here we go. This wonderful person, the name the Buddha, it's really not a name. It's not a name of a person. It's an epithet, right? So it means the awakened one or the enlightened one. And let me tell you the story about the Buddha. There's an amazing story. You know, he began life as a Siddhartha, a prince in what is now like southern Tibet area. And he lived his early days, his first 30 years in great opulence. He was a prince, for Christ's sakes. So he had everything that he wanted, and life was just wonderful. But he decided to go out into the world to understand the nature of suffering. What was when he stepped out from these narrow confines of this palace that he lived in, he noticed there was suffering everywhere. Why? And so he really gave up that life, and he became a wandering mendicant. A mendicant is this idea about, it still happens in India today. It happened more often during that period, where retired, older gentlemen would go out on the road to try to understand the nature of suffering. So that's what he did, and he fell in with a bunch of really crazy people at first who believed that, you shouldn't eat, you should eat just bones and beg for food and live a horrible, horrible life. And he said, whoa, time out, that's not for me. And he bailed out on those folks. But he decided that he had to find the answer. He had to become the awakened or the enlightened one. And so he entered this town of Bodh Gaya. both small town in India, and he sat under the Bodhi tree. And he said, I'm not getting up until I'm awakened, until I have an understanding of the true nature of reality. And he sat there all night in meditation. And finally in the morning he got up and he felt that he was the awakened one, and he came out with some central truth. And the truth that he came out was the central idea of Buddhism is about suffering. It's about suffering and the escape from suffering. How do I end suffering? What are the causes of suffering? And what do I do to live a life to free myself from suffering? You know, pain is necessary sometimes in life, but suffering is always optional. One can suffer pain, can endure pain without suffering. Those are two separate things. And the Buddha really understood that. And the whole teaching of Buddhism is all based on that sort of concept. The central idea of Buddhism is about suffering. And I know, now you're going to suffer through this presentation for the next hour, so you really get a graphic idea about what the hell we're talking about. The first sutra, when he woke, he came out with something known as the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. Everybody together! Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra! It basically means, it is the first book, the first idea that he talked about. And a sutra, consider a suture, like a thread, like a story, really. That's really what it means. And the first was the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra. And it was this path to an enlightened life. And what did it include? Well, there are some basic concept, fundamental ideas about Buddhism that I think you need to understand. So I'm going to make you suffer and listen to them. The three fundamental ideas of Buddhism that lies at the very heart of Buddhism, and the first is impermanence. Impermanence. Nothing in the world is permanent. Everything is impermanent. And we think in terms of two kinds of impermanence, gross and subtle. We can see gross impermanence when we see the carving of the Grand Canyon, for instance, by waters over millions of years. The mountains that get worn down from erosion over millions of years. That's gross impermanence. But there's another one called subtle impermanence, and that is you and I. Do you realize I've been talking, 5 minutes or so? And during that time frame, we have all changed. We're not the same person we were even a second ago because of the miracles of mitosis and cytokinesis, cell division that's going on within you right now. You are changing. Old cells are dying off and new ones are being born. That's a perfect example of this idea of subtle impermanence. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. The nature of reality is that we live in a sea of change. That's what the universe, according to the Buddhists, is all about. It's about change. So we have to understand that everything is impermanent. And one of the ideas behind the reasons for suffering is when we live in ignorance and we fail to understand that nothing is permanent. We say, oh, everything is going great, and then you lose your job. Your job isn't permanent. You're not permanent. The universe is not permanent. Nothing is permanent, and that's one of the fundamental ideas about Buddhism. Another one is selflessness. Selflessness. We live in ignorance if we think that we have any sort of selflessness, that we are a true being, that the bodies that we occupy it has real essence. It doesn't. It is nothingness. We think it is, and we are, because we descend from the divine, and this isn't the Buddhist, what I'm about to talk about, but from a Western perspective, our spirits descend from the divine, and we take on this form, and we lose ourselves in that form, and we think that we are real, that this is a reality. But it's not, because it's continually changing. It is impermanent. And selflessness. And when we understand the idea about selflessness, when we let go of our ego, in other words, when we drop all that and we understand that we are products of change, then we have a possibility of embracing the idea about selflessness. And it's the second fundamental, basic, foundational idea of Buddhism. And there's one more called interdependence. Look, we are all interdependent, right? And Buddha tells us that we are interdependent in three particular ways. First is cause and effect. You know, we are here, John's here because of some causes that happened, 40 years ago, John, whatever it was, maybe a little longer than that. I'm being kind, I'm being very kind. But we are
Times
all...
1.5.
Yeah, there you go. So we are all products of some cause that has happened in the past. We are the effect of some cause. Everything is the effect of some cause. And so this idea about cause and effect is one of the central components of this threefold idea about interdependence. We cannot exist in the absence of some cause that happened in the past. And that's why we're here. So this whole idea about cause and effect. The second is part-whole dependence. Look, we are all part of something else. We think, oh, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a sister, I'm a brother. That signifies that there is some relationship going on there and that we are just a part of some greater whole. Failure to recognize that is comparable to someone saying, hey, you want a new car? Sure. Here's a rear view mirror. Is that really a car? Well, it's a part of a car, but that rear view mirror has absolutely no meaning outside of the car. Here, John, here's a rear view mirror. Well, I don't have a car. Well, then it has absolutely zero meaning to you. It gets its meaning only from the whole, just like us. We get our meaning from, our political affiliations, our national affiliations, our ethnic affiliations, our religious affiliations, our communal affiliations. We become part of that, and so the essence of who we are is just part of the whole, part-whole dependence. That's the second idea. And the third is conceptual imputation. What is that about? Well, that means that we make stuff up about stuff. We give things names. The whole idea about our currency, conceptual imputation. There's no real value there, only the value that we collectively as a society decide that that's what $1 is worth. That's how many bags of whatever it is you're going to get for $1. That is, who says so? Well, someone imputes that. As an example, consider the alternative. During the Civil War, the Confederate money became absolutely useless when the war was over. Conceptual imputation said, now it's valueless. We do that all the time. We do that, and so if you take that a little further and you look at the idea about how we relate to each other, we're not relating to a person as the person is. We're relating to that person as we are. We are imputing all kinds of things on that. Politicians is the perfect example. Some people say, oh, that guy's great. Somebody else will say, oh, no, he sucks. Or he or she, or whatever. We all have our separate opinions, but it's all conceptual imputation. The Buddha the Buddha was the great physician. He was known as the great physician. And so he prescribed a path, a cure for all of this suffering. And it's at the very basis are these three concepts: interdependence, and back here, selflessness and impermanence. Those three concepts. But it goes beyond that. Here's the whole deal. What he really was thinking of, so these are the foundational truths, the foundational ideas, but there's a foundational teaching. How do I communicate that to someone, thought the Buddha. So he says, here's the deal. It is, I've come up with this concept about what are known as the Four Noble Truths. These are the truths that if you live these truths, if you understand these truths, then you can live a noble life. And there's four of them. You want to know what they are, or should we just stop now? Okay, we're going to continue then. The Four Noble Truths, they are basically what the Buddha says are the domains of morality. So the Four Noble Truths are as follows. The truth of suffering, the reality of suffering. Look, suffering really exists in the world. And if you don't see that, you must be in a coma or you're living in a cave or something, because suffering can be seen everywhere and it's not hard to find it. We can easily find suffering. So the first fundamental truth of these noble truths is the idea that there really is suffering, the truth of suffering. The second truth is the truth of the cause of suffering, the source of suffering. Why are we suffering? Well, the fact of the matter is we're suffering for a number of reasons. And the aversion, we are averting things that we have that we don't want. I got an extra 20 pounds on me that I really want to give up. That causes suffering if I can't do that, or I'm not doing that. So there's aversion to things we don't want. There's attraction to things we want and we can't have. I got to have $1 million. But I don't, and that makes me angry, and I'm suffering over it. So it's aversion to things that we don't want, that we have, and attraction to things that we have that we don't want. And the other is ignorance, primal ignorance. Ignoramus. So and how are we ignorant? We're ignorant when we fail to understand that things are impermanent, selflessness, and interdependent. When we don't understand that, we're living in ignorance. And when we're living in ignorance, that is the source of suffering. So it's aversion for things that we don't want, attraction to things we can't have, and the whole idea about living in ignorance, not understanding those three truths that we talked about. That's the second noble truth. The third one is the end of suffering. How do we end suffering? Don't be ignorant. There you go. It's over. Don't be ignorant. Don't look for things that you can't have and let them ruin your life because you don't have them. Don't want something so bad that you can't have that it causes you anger and suffering, all of that. And if you have something and you want to get rid of it, leave it at the curb, or if that's not so easy, like losing weight or whatever, don't suffer about it. You can have pain, you can feel emotional pain or physical pain, but the suffering part is optional. Now, the fourth noble truth is the path to the end of suffering. How do I get to be that person that I just described? How can I do that? Well, here's how you do it, through this Eightfold Path. This is where he's a brilliant guy, or he's dead now, but he used to be a brilliant guy. The three domains, he looks at these domains of morality, and he says, how do I live a moral life? How does one live a moral life? Well, you have to look at what life is, what the world is all about, and it has these three domains of morality. It's action, thought, and mindfulness. So, for instance, under action, so these are the 8 paths to take, right? This is the fourth noble truth. So it's right action, right livelihood, right speech. Do the right thing. Do the right thing. You know what the right thing to do is. Don't steal your neighbor's cat or whatever. You're doing the right. I do that all the time. The cat keeps running away. I keep torturing it, bringing it back. Come back here, play with the dogs. I don't know where I'm going with this. So the right action. So we have this idea about doing the right thing, and also right livelihood. Look, if you're making your money breaking people's kneecaps because they owe money to Uncle Luigi, you may not be in the right business to achieve enlightenment. I'm just guessing. Maybe not. So right livelihood and right speech. Right speech. When you think about it, when you think about criticizing someone for it, and I look at social media, I look at Facebook, whoa, there is such anger and hatred and the things that people are saying, it's just unbelievable. Do you need to say something? Is it necessary that it be said? Is it true? And is it kind? Is it compassionate? If it doesn't meet those criteria, then shut up. That's what the Buddha would say. He'd say shut up. Well, maybe he wouldn't say shut up. He spoke Sanskrit, so who knows what garbage would come out of his mouth. So anyway, then there's the idea about thought. And here's how you do it. You've got to view the world rightly. The idea about viewing the world as it is, having some wisdom about understanding the Four Noble Truths, understanding the reality of suffering, what causes it, how to get. So that's the right thought and the right intention. My intention in doing something has to be noble. Is it a good intention, or am I out to screw somebody over? If I am, go back to square one and do some more meditation. You don't get it yet. The other idea about right effort. So you take the right view, that is this not living in this primal ignorance. The right intention, I have good intention. I want, whatever I'm going to do, I have noble heart in doing it. And the idea about right effort. By doing, put forth the effort, but it has to be a conscious effort. Don't be stupid about it. Here's an example. You've got to have enlightened understanding. Instead of, for instance, you go to Africa and these people are suffering. You see them, they've got, river blindness or something. So you say, I'm going to stick around and help them. In a week or two, you come down with river blindness and you become part of the problem. That's compassion, but it's stupid compassion. You've got to understand that if you want to help those people, then go back, find a plan. Get somebody to invest in the money to get them clean water, as an example. That's an intelligent approach. Don't stay there and say, I'll help them out with no plan to do it, because then you're part of the problem. That idea is a metaphor that goes beyond that kind of situation. I think we can all find instances in our life where we can demonstrate that kind of idea. Then the last one is mindfulness. These are all the domains, and these are the Eightfold Path to the end of suffering. Right mindfulness. You ever hear of a guy named Dennis Merritt Jones? I know you have. Some of you have. Some of you may have. And he spends, I think he built a career on the idea about mindfulness, and it's so understanding, because you have to be focused about being mindful about where you are right now, right here, and your surroundings, and understanding that don't let your mind just run on and take actions based upon, you get angry, for instance. Stop it, cool down a little bit, Think about it. Be mindful about it. And the other thing is right concentration. You got to focus on certain things. You really can't. You can't be split apart in 87 different directions. If you want to achieve this end of suffering, stop that. Get that together, get that under control, and concentrate on what is going to make you give you a meaningful life. This is all the Buddha talking, not me, but it is the Buddha. But I kind of agree with him. I want to tell you about Buddhism because some amazing things happened. There were some amazing changes. So look, he was around like 500 BC, okay, the Buddha. And for the last 40 years of his life, he was this, like I said, this wandering mendicant, and he's teaching all these people. He traveled throughout northern India here, and he spread all of this. But all the people who were coming to him, they figured that, if I'm going to be a Buddhist now, I've got to become a monk, right? So it was really this teaching, even though the people supported the monks and fed them and gave them whatever they need, the practice itself for the first 500 years was limited to the monks. It was kind of a very closed kind of organization. They thought it was kind of secret knowledge. But something amazing happened around the turn of the millennium, the turn of the first century. Just about the time Christianity came into being, Mahayana Buddhism came into being, and it changed Buddhism forever. The idea about the awakening that Buddha had under the Bodhi tree, that's known as the first turn of the wheel. The whole idea about the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism is known as the second turn of the wheel. Both of these wheels refer to the wheel of life, the Buddhist wheel of life that we're going to take a look at in just a little while. But take a look at what happened here. It moves up. Now there's some interesting things about this. Believe it, pretty soon you'll see some interesting things up here. But there's some interesting things about this map. And it is that as this idea about Buddhism spread, it was changed. It was influenced by the cultures in which it was introduced. So we've got Tibet. Tibet you know, that they didn't have a central kind of government or anything at this point in Tibet. It was a bunch of loose tribes and affiliations, and so they didn't really have any kind of national identity. So when Buddhism came to Tibet, it came in its most purest form into Tibet because it wasn't competing with other cultural iconic beliefs or languages or any of that sort of stuff. It just wasn't competing with any of that. But when it got to China, whoa, things changed all the time. Why? Because it was heavily influenced by both Confucianism and Taoism. And because it was influenced by both Confucianism and Taoism in China, it merged, it became something different, and it became what we later refer to as Zen Buddhism. They would refer to it as Chen Buddhism or Chan Buddhism and in China. But then it was exported to Korea and Japan. In Japan, we really get into the Zen perspective about Buddhism. So it moved and it changed, and everything was changing and moving around. And it is known as the great vehicle. That's what Mahayana means, the great vehicle. Why? Because it became a missionary style of a spiritual, and by the way, I'm reluctant to call it a religion because it doesn't glorify any sort of deity or anything. It recognizes the existence of gods, but according to them, even gods die. So we'll take a look at that later when we look at the wheel here. So it was the great vehicle. It starts to change everything. It becomes a missionary. It's moving away from this very protected kind of philosophy that was only shared in these secret, meetings with all of these monks, and it became a missionary tradition, and things changed. Now, here's I love this story. Here's an interesting story. Maybe it's interesting. Maybe you guys will fall asleep. I don't know. But here's the idea. The idea about sutra, we talked about that earlier. It's a thread, right? It's a story, so to speak. Well, technically, from a Buddhist perspective, the only sutras were teachings that either the Buddha created himself or that he heard that were discussed in the presence of the Buddha, and he endorsed those sutras. So those are the only thing in the sacred text that were allowed to be called sutras. However, around the turn of the millennium, the beginning like 2,000 years ago roughly, something changed. All of a sudden, we've got the emergence of what are known as Mahayana sutras. How does that happen? What? Where were they the last 500 years? What really happened is probably a bunch of monks came together and they started writing the Mahayana sutras. But to have authenticity, they're supposed to come from the Buddha, right? So here's how they explained it. They said, well, they actually were teachings of the Buddha that have been hidden for 500 years. You see, they're very sacred writings of the Buddha. They're so sacred that the Buddha was worried that they might fall into somebody's hands who could really use them to damage the world, to do grave damage in the world. And so he did what I usually do when I want to hide something. I give it to sea serpents and ask them to hide it at the bottom of the ocean for me. Don't you guys do that? Well, everybody does that. So the Buddha decided he was going to give it to friendly sea serpents. I'm thinking Cecil the sea serpent, which was a thing when I was a kid, way before your time. So you remember. So anyway, so he gives Cecil these sutras. And they say, hold them there, and some guy named Narjuna, around the beginning of the first millennium, will come and pick them up and ask them, and then deliver them to Narjuna. So apparently you can have parchment under the ocean for 500 years and it doesn't destroy it at all. Well, who knew? So, but that's the story that was circulated, and that this guy Narjuna, who was actually a 2nd century monk, by the way, so he couldn't have possibly been there, but the monks had to come up with some sort of story, and so that's the story that they came up with developed through history, about why the Mahayana sutras are fully entitled to be called sutras, just like the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra.